He traded a love story for a fleeting adventure and only realized his mistake when life demanded the highest price, his own survival. David had it all: a wife who truly loved him, a stable family, a life built together. But, seduced by the glitter of something new, he abandoned everything for another woman. He thought he was starting a new chapter, but in reality, he was digging his own grave. Years later, fate didn't just knock on the door, it kicked it down. A cruel diagnosis, a rare disease, and the only chance to live depended on a transplant. The problem: the only compatible person was the very one he had hurt the most in the past, his ex-wife. Now tell me, would you forgive someone like that? Would you give them a second chance, even with your heart in pieces? This story is real, and it will make you reflect on love, pain, and choices that can't be undone. Before we begin, comment below where you're watching from, city, state, or country. Let's see how far this story will touch hearts. The love of a lifetime. They met on a rainy Tuesday. Not the kind of day you'd expect sparks to fly, but maybe that's why it felt so special. David was late for a meeting, juggling a briefcase and a coffee that had already spilled down his sleeve. Emily? She was rushing to shelter under the same awning he was ducking into. And just like that, two strangers collided into a single story. Their first conversation lasted 5 minutes, their second, 5 hours. From the very beginning, it wasn't fireworks, it was something deeper, safer, solid. They didn't fall in love like a house on fire. They built it brick by brick. Quiet moments, inside jokes, Sunday breakfasts, late-night talks about dreams that made them feel like kids again. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. Emily brought warmth into David's structured world. She was a teacher who believed in messy art projects and handwritten letters. He was an analyst who believed in order, goals, and 5-year plans. But where he saw numbers, she saw meaning. Where he found risk, she found adventure, and somehow it worked. They got married on a cool autumn day, surrounded by friends, family, and leaves falling like golden confetti. David had never felt more sure about anything. Emily's vows weren't perfect, but they were honest. And when she looked into his eyes, he felt something most men spend their entire lives chasing: peace. Their home wasn't fancy. A small 2-bedroom house on the edge of town, filled with books, plants, and laughter echoing from room to room. They built traditions: Friday pizza nights, Saturday hikes, slow dances in the kitchen when no one was watching. And then came the struggles, like they always do. Miscarriages, job losses, fights that left the room silent for days. But they stayed. They always stayed. Because love, real love, is not always loud. Sometimes it's choosing to sit beside someone even when you don't know what to say. It's cleaning up the messes they leave behind. It's holding onto the pieces because letting go would hurt more than the weight of carrying them. David wasn't the romantic type. He didn't do flowers just because, or write poems like Emily used to hope for. But he showed up. He fixed things when they broke. He rubbed her back when she was sick. He remembered how she liked her coffee: 2 sugars, no cream. And Emily? She never stopped believing in him, even when he stopped believing in himself. Through layoffs and long hours, she was his quiet cheerleader. She saw the good in him even when he couldn't see it himself. By the time their 10th anniversary rolled around, people still looked at them as that couple, the ones who had figured it out, the ones that still smiled at each other across the table. But sometimes the most dangerous thing isn't falling out of love. It's assuming love is unshakable, that it'll always be there, waiting, no matter how far you wander. Because life has a way of testing what you thought was certain. David didn't know it then, but a storm was coming. A slow, silent shift that would unravel everything they had sewn together. Not with one big betrayal, but with the tiny cracks he never bothered to seal. He stopped noticing her laughter. He stopped asking how her day was. He became busy, always busy, and slowly, quietly, the woman who once felt like home began to feel like a stranger sleeping beside him. But that part of the story comes later. For now, This was still the chapter where love felt safe, where two people, against all odds, found each other and believed, truly believed, that forever meant something. The beginning of the rupture. It didn't happen all at once. There was no dramatic betrayal, no loud slamming of doors, just a slow, quiet drifting, like two ships that once sailed side by side, now starting to veer ever so slightly off course. At first, it was barely noticeable, a missed kiss before leaving for work, a delayed response to a text, less laughter echoing through the house. Life had simply become busy. David had recently been promoted. More responsibility, longer hours, endless deadlines. The kind of pressure that feels like achievement from the outside, but slowly corrodes the inside. He told himself he was doing it for the family, for Emily, for the kids, for their future. Their children, Liam and Sophie, were 7 and 4. A whirlwind of questions, crayons, and scraped knees. Emily had stepped away from her teaching job to raise them full-time, something she never imagined doing, but did with grace and heart. She filled their days with stories, crafts, and backyard adventures. But her nights, often spent alone, folding laundry and wondering when David would walk through the door. When he finally did, he was exhausted. She was too, but in different ways. She craved conversation, connection. He craved silence, just a moment to breathe. They loved their children fiercely. That never changed, but sometimes being good parents can mask the cracks forming between being good partners. One night, Emily tried to talk. The kids were asleep, the house was quiet, and she asked him gently, "Are you happy?" David paused. Too long. "I'm tired," he finally said. "Work is just a lot right now." She nodded, biting her tongue. Not the answer she hoped for, but she let it go. Again, weeks passed, then months. The small things started to disappear. No more spontaneous "I love yous," no more dancing in the kitchen. Their anniversary came and went, with a rushed dinner and babysitter on a timer. Emily told herself it was just a phase, that all marriages go through ups and downs, but something was changing in David. He had begun mentioning a new project at work, one that paired him with a young consultant named Rachel. "She's sharp," he'd said, "knows her stuff." Emily smiled the first time he mentioned her. By the fifth, something in her stomach twisted. David didn't even realize he was slipping. He started staying later at the office. Not always because of work, but because of how easy it was to talk to Rachel. She listened, she laughed at his jokes. She made him feel like a man again, not just a husband, a father, a provider. But David didn't see it as emotional cheating. Not yet. He told himself they were just colleagues, friends. Emily saw it coming before David did. He had started checking his phone more often, even when playing with the kids. He smiled at messages he wouldn't share. He no longer asked how her day was. At night, he turned away from her in bed, scrolling endlessly, lost in a world she wasn't invited into. She asked him once, "Is there something you're not telling me?" He looked up, startled. "What? No, don't be dramatic." But her instincts whispered otherwise. A woman always knows. She began to feel invisible in her own home, like a background character in the life she helped build. And still, she stayed, for Liam, for Sophie, for the history they shared. She believed in holding on, even when the rope burned her hands. Then came the night that changed everything. Emily found a message, just one, left open by accident on David's laptop. It wasn't explicit, but it was enough. "I wish you were here. Today was rough without you." Rachel, no signature, no emojis, just words that hit harder than any slap. Emily didn't scream. She didn't throw things. She closed the laptop, put the kids to bed, and sat in the living room with her hands trembling. The man she had built a life with, through every high and low, was slipping away, not because of one mistake, but because of 1,000 missed moments where they could have turned back and didn't. In that quiet room, Emily realized something painful. You can't fight for someone who doesn't even know they're walking away. The choice that changed everything. David sat in the car outside their house, the engine still running, fingers gripping the steering wheel. It was past midnight. The lights inside were off. The silence of the neighborhood felt heavier than usual, as if the world already knew what he was about to do. He had made his decision, or maybe, deep down, the decision had been made for him a long time ago. Earlier that evening, he had met Rachel for dinner. It wasn't meant to be anything more than a casual conversation between colleagues. But it wasn't the first time, and it wasn't casual anymore. They laughed, they shared stories, and when she placed her hand gently on his, David didn't pull away. For the first time in months, he felt seen, wanted, alive. He told himself Emily didn't care anymore, that she had drifted first, that they were just going through the motions. But beneath all those justifications was guilt and fear. Back inside the house, Emily waited, awake, not because she expected him, but because she couldn't sleep again. Her thoughts were louder than the quiet. She had sensed this moment coming like a slow-moving storm on the horizon. But even so, knowing doesn't make it hurt any less. The front door opened softly. David stepped in like a ghost, careful not to wake the kids. Emily was sitting on the couch, the faint glow of the kitchen light casting shadows across her tired face. She didn't speak, neither did he. For a moment it felt like time had frozen. Finally she whispered, "Is there someone else?" David didn't lie. Yes. Her face didn't change. No outburst, no accusations, just the ache of confirmation. "Do you love her?" she asked. He paused. Too long. "I don't know." That was the worst answer of all. Emily stood up, holding back tears, her voice steady. "Then go. But don't make this house your battlefield. Our children sleep here." Liam and Sophie. David hadn't even thought about what this would do to them. He had been so consumed with himself, with his emptiness, that he forgot who would pay the price. But he didn't argue. He didn't beg. He simply nodded, walked upstairs, packed a small bag, and left. As the door closed behind him, Emily collapsed into the silence. The next few weeks were a blur. David moved into a small apartment downtown. Rachel helped him furnish it. He told the kids it was temporary, that he and Mommy just needed space. But children understand more than adults give them credit for. Liam started acting out in school. Sophie cried every night for her daddy. And Emily? She held the pieces together the best she could. Soccer games, homework, bedtime stories with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. David visited on weekends, brought gifts, played with the kids like nothing had changed. But they could feel it. The distance, the disruption, the quiet tension that hung in the air. And every time he left, Emily stayed behind to clean up the emotional mess. This was the choice David had made. And though he wouldn't realize the full weight of it until much later, that night, the night he walked out, was the moment everything shifted, not just in their marriage, but in who they were as people. Because once trust is broken, love doesn't just fade, it transforms. A new life and the invisible price. David thought freedom would feel like flying. No more strained conversations, no more walking on eggshells, no more distant dinners or cold silences before bed. He had left and now he was starting over, a clean slate. His apartment was modern, bright, minimalist, quiet, too quiet. Rachel visited often. She brought wine, Chinese takeout, and that light-hearted energy that had once drawn him in. They laughed. They watched movies late into the night. She told him she believed in his potential, said he'd been underappreciated, taken for granted, and David believed it at first. For the first few weeks, it felt like a honeymoon. No children to chase, no laundry piles, no packed lunches or school runs, just long mornings, weekend getaways, and a woman who looked at him like he was still the man he wanted to be. But the silence in his apartment began to stretch too long. He missed Liam's messy handprints on the windows, Sophie's voice calling out for one more bedtime story. He missed Emily's little notes left in his bag, even the ones she'd stopped writing months before he left. Rachel wasn't unkind. But she wasn't a mother. She didn't understand the chaos of raising kids or the exhaustion of being everything to everyone. She didn't ask about Liam's asthma or Sophie's nightmares. And David stopped talking about them. afraid she'd see the cracks. Back at home, Emily was doing everything: school drop-offs, parent-teacher meetings, late-night fevers and early-morning tantrums. She was the one who wiped away tears and signed permission slips. She was the one who heard Sophie whisper, "Why did Daddy pick her?" Emily cried in the laundry room once a week, never in front of the kids, never on the phone with friends. She was surviving, barely, but she refused to let their world fall apart completely. David showed up on weekends. He brought toys, pizza, and fake smiles. For a few hours, he played the role of fun dad, but the kids could feel the shift. He wasn't theirs anymore, not fully. Liam stopped asking when Daddy was coming home. Sophie started drawing pictures where their family only had 3 people. David noticed, and it stung. He tried to talk to Emily once, asked if they could be friendly again. She looked at him, calm but distant. "I'm not your emotional safety net, David. You made your choice." He didn't answer, because deep down he knew she was right. At work, things began to change too. Rachel was no longer just the exciting new flame. She was part of his every day. The charm wore off. The spark dimmed. Arguments started, small but sharp. She accused him of being emotionally unavailable. He accused her of being too demanding. They both avoided the truth. The fantasy was better than the reality. David started drinking more. Nothing excessive. Just enough to numb the quiet. Just enough to sleep. He missed family dinners, even the chaotic ones. He missed arguing with Emily over what movie to watch. He missed falling asleep next to someone who knew his soul, not just his surface. But he never said it out loud. Instead, he scrolled through old photos when no one was looking, watched Liam's soccer videos on repeat, played Sophie's voice memos just to hear her say, "I love you," like she used to. He thought about going back. Thought about apologizing, rebuilding, begging, but pride is a stubborn thing, and so is shame. He told himself things weren't that bad, that Emily was fine without him, that the kids would adjust. But the truth haunted him at night. He hadn't just left a woman, he had left a family, and no matter how shiny his new life looked on the outside, inside, he was still looking for the home he walked away from. The fall, it began with fatigue. At first, David blamed it on stress. Long hours, tension with Rachel, and the ever-present guilt he buried under small talk and takeout containers. He felt drained, sluggish, but assumed he just needed a weekend to reset, maybe a vacation, maybe less thinking about what he'd left behind. But then came the headaches, the dizziness, the strange, persistent pain in his lower back. He brushed it off until one morning, in the middle of a client presentation, the world around him tilted, literally. The lights blurred, his knees gave out, and everything went black. He woke up in a hospital bed, iFu in his arm, beeping machines. Rachel by his side, scrolling on her phone, her face pale but distant. A doctor entered, somber-faced and professional. David braced himself. "Your kidneys are failing." The words hit harder than anything he had expected, like a punch that knocked the air out of him. "Both?" he asked. "Yes, we've caught it late. Your levels are dangerously low. You'll need dialysis immediately, and you'll be placed on the transplant list." David blinked. Dialysis? Transplant? The words didn't feel real. He was only 42. He wasn't supposed to be sick. Over the next week, his life unraveled. Dialysis became his new routine, 3 times a week, 4 hours a session. The vibrant man who once ran meetings, picked up his kids, laughed over pancakes, now sat in a sterile chair, watching his blood cycle through a machine. Every session left him more exhausted than the last. Rachel tried to be supportive at first. She came to a few treatments, brought his favorite coffee, held his hand, but soon she started showing up late. Then, not at all. Their apartment grew colder, quieter. Arguments flared over small things. His mood, her distance, her not signing up for this. The cracks they had painted over with affection now split wide open. One night, after a particularly brutal session, David came home to find Rachel gone. A note on the counter, no emotion, just an ending. "I'm sorry. I can't do this anymore. I hope you find peace." That was it. David sat on the floor for a long time, alone with the note and the steady hum of a broken refrigerator. He didn't cry. He didn't rage. He just stared at the walls, feeling the full weight of everything he had traded and everything he had lost. His mother was too old to donate. His sister had medical issues. His name was added to the transplant list. But the waiting time was long, too long. Every week his body grew weaker. His appetite disappeared. His hair thinned. He looked in the mirror and saw someone he didn't recognize. The hospital social worker mentioned living donors, close family, maybe friends. But David had burned too many bridges. And then came a thought, one he didn't want to face. Emily. He hadn't spoken to her in weeks. He still saw the kids, but only when she allowed it. The visits were tense, controlled, civil, but cold. He couldn't ask her. Could he? It felt wrong, unfair. But as the doctors became more concerned, as the wait list grew longer, desperation began to drown pride. He called her. The phone rang 5 times, 6. Then her voice, steady and cautious. "Hello?" He hesitated. "Emily, it's me, David." A pause. "I know. I need to talk to you. It's important." She said nothing but didn't hang up. "I'm sick," he continued. "It's my kidneys. I'm on dialysis. I need a transplant. And the doctors said, I need to find a match. Someone close. Someone willing." The silence stretched so long, he thought she'd ended the call. Finally, her voice barely a whisper. "And you're asking me?" His throat tightened. "I wouldn't if I had another choice. I swear, but I don't. And I know I don't deserve it. I didn't know who else to call." Emily didn't cry. She didn't yell. She just said, "Let me think." And the line went dead. David sat in the quiet, the phone still pressed to his ear. This was his fall. Not just the sickness, not just the breakup, not just the dialysis. It was this moment, the realization that the only person who could save him might be the one he hurt the most. And if she walked away now, he couldn't blame her. The desperate search. The hospital walls were beginning to feel like a second home, cold, sterile, and filled with silent prayers. Emily hadn't slept properly in days. Her eyes, once bright with certainty, now carried the weight of exhaustion, of doubt, of fear. David's condition was deteriorating faster than the doctors anticipated. The rare autoimmune disease had spread like wildfire, attacking vital organs with silent brutality. Every test result came back worse than the last, and despite all their efforts, the transplant list offered no hope. David's blood type, combined with the rarity of his condition, made him nearly impossible to match. But giving up, that wasn't an option, not for Emily. Even after everything he'd done, leaving her for another woman, breaking their home into pieces, she couldn't stand by and watch him wither away. She told herself it was for Liam and Sophie. They deserved to have their father. But deep down, something else was pulling at her too, a thread of feeling that refused to be cut. That same day, while the kids were with her sister, Emily sat at the edge of David's hospital bed. His face looked gaunt, his cheeks hollow. The strong, confident man who once walked out of their lives was now reduced to shallow breaths and quiet groans. Yet when he opened his eyes and saw her, he still tried to smile. "You don't have to keep coming," he whispered. "You've already done more than I deserve." Emily looked away. "You're right. I don't have to, but I want to." There was a pause. He studied her face, trying to read between the lines. "Why? I honestly don't know," she said softly. "Maybe because we built a life once. Maybe because of Liam and Sophie, or maybe because I'm still angry and this is the only way I know how to make sense of it." David nodded slowly. "Fair." Later that night, Emily stood in the hallway with Dr. Vasquez, the transplant specialist. His voice was low, careful, as if every word had to be chosen like pieces in a delicate puzzle. "There is a possibility," he said. "A very slim one. We could run compatibility tests on close family, even an ex-spouse. In rare cases, there can be a match." Emily's heart stopped for a second. Me? She hadn't even considered that. "I'll do the test," she said without hesitation. The next 48 hours were a whirlwind of blood work, cross-matching, and anxious waiting. Emily didn't say anything to David, not yet. There was no point giving him hope unless there was something real to offer. She kept busy, calling old contacts, researching clinical trials, messaging distant relatives, desperate for options. Liam, only 9, had started asking questions. "Is Dad gonna die?" he asked one morning over cereal. Emily froze. She looked into her son's wide, scared eyes. "We're doing everything we can, sweetheart. I promise." Sophie, just 6, had drawn a picture of the whole family, holding hands in front of a big heart. She had even included David, despite barely understanding what was happening. That picture stayed folded in Emily's purse, a reminder of what was at stake. Finally, the call came. Dr. Vasquez's voice was steady but urgent. "Emily, you're a match." She sat down on the edge of her bed, her knees trembling. "Are you sure?" "Not just a match," he said. "You're the best possible donor we've seen. It's extraordinary." Her throat tightened. All this time, the one person David had betrayed the most was the one fate had chosen to save him. When she told him, David's eyes filled with tears. He couldn't speak. He just reached out and gently took her hand in his. "You don't have to do this," he said, voice cracking. Emily looked him straight in the eye. "But I will." The decision wasn't easy. It never could be. But deep within her, beneath the betrayal, the pain, and the heartbreak, there was something stronger, compassion, maybe even love, in its most broken and resilient form. The clock was ticking, and as the sun rose the next morning, so did hope. The reunion. David stood outside the modest suburban house, a far cry from the lavish apartment he now called home, and yet this place felt more like life than anything he'd experienced in the past few years. His hand trembled as he reached for the doorbell, heart pounding like it was trying to escape his chest. It had been years since he'd left. Since he'd traded laughter-filled dinners for empty wine glasses, bedtime stories for meaningless parties, real love for shallow infatuation. He rang the bell, footsteps, then silence, then Emily. She opened the door slowly, eyes narrowing, arms crossed. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Her stare said everything. "Hi," David said, his voice hoarse. "Can we talk?" Emily tilted her head slightly. "You're 2 years too late for talk." Her tone was calm, but laced with steel. David took a breath. "Please, just 5 minutes." She hesitated, then stepped aside. 5, and don't make me regret it." The living room hadn't changed much. The same worn couch, the same framed drawings from Sophie and Liam on the wall. Time had passed, but in this house, pieces of the past still clung to life like ivy. David sat, awkward and unsure, while Emily remained standing, arms still folded. "You look different," he said. "I am different," she replied. "Pain changes people. You should know." David lowered his eyes. "I do. That's why I'm here." "Because you're sick," she said bluntly. He nodded slowly. "They say it's rare, aggressive. My liver's failing. I didn't know where else to go." Emily's laugh was bitter. "No friends? No woman you left me for?" "She left," he said quietly. "When things got hard, she vanished. It turns out real love doesn't walk away when life stops being fun." Emily flinched, not because she was moved, but because that line sounded like something she would have once said to him. "And now you come crawling back to the woman you betrayed," she said, walking to the window, her back to him. "You want what exactly? Forgiveness? Pity?" "No, just a chance." She turned to face him. "A chance to live?" He nodded. "And you're here because you're the only compatible match. The doctors said it. Sophie and Liam are too young, and so you thought I'd just give you a piece of myself after you tore me apart." "I didn't know where else to go," he whispered. There was a long silence. The air between them felt heavier than ever. Years of resentment, betrayal, and heartbreak thickened the room like fog. "I hated you," she said finally. "Not for leaving, for how you left, for how you made me feel like I was never enough, for how you hurt the kids. You didn't just break a marriage, you broke a family." David's eyes welled up. I know that now. But knowing doesn't change the past. No, she said softly, it doesn't. But maybe it can change the future if you'll let it. Emily looked at him for a long time, and for a moment, David saw a flicker, just a flicker, of the woman he once knew. Not the wounded ex-wife or the hardened single mother, but the woman who once believed in second chances, the woman who once believed in him. But the flicker vanished as quickly as it came. "I'll think about it," she said at last. David nodded, his heart sinking even though the words weren't a no. It wasn't hope, exactly. But it wasn't the door slamming shut either. "I never stopped loving you," he said, voice barely audible. Emily's eyes met his, and for the first time in the conversation, her expression softened, just slightly. "That's the tragedy, isn't it?" she whispered. "That love doesn't die, even when it should." David stood slowly. "Thank you for hearing me out." He walked to the door. As he opened it, he paused. "Tell Sophie and Liam I love them. Tell them yourself if I decide to save you," she replied. He turned to look at her one last time. "I hope you do," he said. And then he stepped into the fading light of the evening, not knowing if he'd been granted a second chance at life or just a final goodbye. The dilemma. Emily stood in the stillness of her small kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound grounding her to the present. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying the chill of a coming storm. Inside her chest, however, a tempest had already erupted. David. He had returned, broken and remorseful, pleading for her help. Not just emotional forgiveness. This time, it was a matter of life or death. He was in serious trouble. Real trouble. The kind that knocks at your door in the form of men in suits with hollow eyes and clipped speech. The kind that doesn't care about your heartbreak or your healing. She had told them she needed time. Time. What a fragile illusion. Emily stared at the worn photograph on her fridge. One from a life that felt like a dream now. She and David, laughing in the sun, arms wrapped around each other, unaware of how love can twist into something unrecognizable. She remembered that girl, that version of herself who believed that love could conquer anything. That girl no longer existed, yet the woman who stood in her place now was torn in half. Could she really save the man who once shattered her heart into pieces too small to count? Could she stand in front of the storm now and choose to protect him, even if it meant reopening wounds that had never truly healed? Her mind screamed logic. Let him face it. He earned every consequence, every sleepless night, every mistake, every silent cry you endured alone. He deserves it all. But her heart whispered a different truth. You loved him once. Maybe, deep down, you still do. The worst part, she wasn't sure what hurt more, the betrayal or the fact that a part of her still wanted to believe in him. She made tea, if only to do something with her hands. As the kettle hissed, she remembered the night David had left. No warning, no explanation, just a note and a hollow space where promises used to live. She had sworn then never to let him back in. And yet, here he was, not asking for love, but mercy. The knock on the door jolted her. For a moment, she hoped it wasn't him. Then shamefully, hoped it was. She opened it to find David on the porch, soaked in rain and silence. His eyes held that same look from years ago, equal parts regret and hope. He didn't speak, neither did she. The rain filled the space between them. Finally, Emily stepped aside. "Come in." Inside, she handed him a towel. "You have 10 minutes. He nodded, not pushing. "I know what I did to you, and I'd take it all back if I could. But this isn't just about us anymore. They want me gone, Emily. I don't even know if I'll make it through the week." She crossed her arms. "So why come to me?" "Because I had nowhere else to go," he said simply. "You're the only person I ever trusted, the only one who ever saw the real me." Emily scoffed. "And look what that got me." He lowered his gaze. "I'm not asking you to forgive me, just help me disappear, just this once." The room fell quiet again. She stared at him. The same jawline, the same messy hair, the same damn vulnerability that once made her fall so hard. But he wasn't the same, and neither was she. "You left me to drown," she whispered. "You left without a word. And now you want me to be your lifeboat. I know, he said, voice cracking. And if you say no, I'll walk away. I won't ask again. Emily looked away. Every part of her screamed for clarity, but none came. Only memories. The good, the terrible, and the ones that blurred the line between love and self-betrayal. She poured herself a cup of tea. It shook slightly in her hand. I need time, she said finally. One night. I'll have your answer by morning. David nodded. That's more than I deserve. And then he left, leaving behind wet footprints and a silence thicker than grief. Emily sat alone, cup in hand, heart in ruins. Tomorrow, she would decide. Save the man who destroyed her, or let him fall. The decision. Emily stood at the edge of the hospital corridor, staring through the glass panel that revealed David lying still in his bed. Monitors beeped softly, keeping time with his shallow breaths. He looked nothing like the man who had once shattered her. Gone was the confident, untouchable figure. In his place lay someone human, too human. The storm inside her had been brewing since his reappearance. Now it churned violently. Everyone had weighed in. Her mother had urged her to walk away. Her best friend reminded her of the night she cried herself to sleep. Even her therapist had suggested setting boundaries, but none of them had lived that last goodbye. None of them had tasted betrayal like she had. She had come today not for closure, not out of duty. She had come to decide. The nurse appeared beside her. You don't have to go in. Just say the word and I'll tell him you declined. Emily nodded absently, but something in her chest stirred. Not pity, not love, not even hate. Just a quiet ache. She opened the door. David turned his head slowly. You came. His voice was rough, like gravel, like guilt. His eyes searched hers but found a wall. Her silence pressed heavy between them. You don't have to say anything, he added quickly. I know I'm the last person you want to see. She studied him. Then why did you ask to? He sighed. Because I wanted to look you in the eye when I said I'm sorry. I should have done that years ago, but I was a coward. I thought running would spare us both. Emily crossed her arms. No, you thought running would spare you. The truth landed sharp and he winced, but he didn't argue. You wrecked me, David. I built a life from those pieces and now you're asking me to what? Absolve you? No, he whispered. I'm asking you to let go. Not for me, for you. Emily almost laughed. You think I haven't? You think just because I'm standing here I'm still tangled up in the old story? David's gaze dropped. Maybe I hoped. She felt it then. That old tug, the remnants of a love that once promised forever. But it no longer held power. It was a photo in a drawer, not a wound in her chest. I thought about walking away, she said, her voice softening. I thought about letting you live with what you did, alone, unforgiven. He nodded slowly. And you still might. But then I realized, she continued, stepping closer, that what I needed wasn't revenge. It was release. David looked up, unsure. Release? You don't get to have me back, but you also don't get to keep me stuck in that version of myself. I choose to forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I do. The air between them shifted. Thank you, he said, tears welling. I never expected that. Emily smiled faintly. Don't thank me. This is for me, so I can stop carrying your ghost. David nodded, eyes damp. So, this is goodbye? It always was. We just hadn't said it properly. She turned to leave, but paused in the doorway. David, yes? Whatever life you have left, use it well. Don't waste this second chance. He nodded again, speechless. And then she walked out, not as the woman he broke, but as the woman she had become. Stronger, wiser, whole. Outside, the late afternoon sun bathed the world in golden light. She exhaled deeply, finally free. Not because he asked her to be, but because she chose it. Because sometimes the bravest decision is to let go. Forgiveness, but not forgetting. The sterile scent of the hospital corridor was oddly comforting. For Emily, it no longer smelled like fear. It smelled like closure. She sat by the window outside the operating room, staring at the clouds shifting behind the glass. For hours, she hadn't moved, not out of worry, but out of something far more complex. Release. David was in surgery. She had signed the forms. The doctors were surprised. No next of kin had come forward. No family had shown up. Only Emily, not as his lover, not as his partner, but as someone who had lived through his storm and come out the other side. She had the power to save him, and she chose to use it. But it wasn't an act of love. It was an act of liberation. She remembered his face when she visited him in pre-op, pale, hollow. That once confident, charming man now seemed small in the hospital bed, swallowed by the consequences of his choices. He had looked at her with pleading eyes, searching for something, maybe forgiveness, maybe hope, maybe a chance to rewrite what had already been burned into memory. "Thank you," he had whispered. Emily nodded, not coldly, not with affection, just calmly. "You're welcome," she had said, and then she walked out. Now, hours later, a nurse finally approached. "He's stable," the woman said. "Surgery was successful." Emily gave a slight nod. "Would you like to see him?" Emily stood, then paused. She didn't need to see him. Not anymore. That part of her life was no longer hers to carry. Still, something nudged her. Curiosity, maybe. Or one final goodbye. When she entered his room, David looked up. Tubes attached to his arms, monitors beeping softly behind him. His expression was a mixture of relief and regret. "You saved me," he said. "No," she replied gently but firmly. "I didn't let you die. There's a difference." He winced, physically and emotionally. "I don't deserve it. I know." Silence filled the room like fog, and in that silence they both realized something that neither had ever spoken aloud. Some wounds don't heal with time. Some don't heal at all. But the person carrying them learns how to stop letting them define her. David tried to speak again, but Emily raised her hand. "I'm not here for apologies," she said, "or for explanations. I've replayed this story in my mind too many times already. I'm here to say something clear." He waited. "I forgive you," she said. David blinked, slowly, like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "But I'm not coming back. We're not starting over. This, us, it ended a long time ago." She stepped closer, standing beside his bed, like a visitor to a past life. "You broke me," she continued, "but I rebuilt myself, and the woman I am now doesn't belong to you. Not in any way." Tears welled in his eyes. "Emily." She gave him a soft, almost motherly smile. "Heal, grow, be better if you can. But don't wait for me. I'm not yours to wait for." With that, she turned and walked out. Each step felt lighter than the last. No more anger, no more ache, just peace. Outside, the world hadn't changed, but Emily had. The taxi ride home was quiet. She looked out the window, watching the city pulse with life, so full of stories, so full of second chances. But this wasn't about starting over. This was about starting new. She moved into her new apartment the following week. Nothing extravagant, just hers. Her books filled the shelves. Her art hung on the walls. Her music danced from the speakers as she unpacked her final box and opened a bottle of wine. She poured a glass, sat on the floor by the open window, and breathed deeply. Free. David would live, but he would live with the memory of the woman he lost, not because she vanished, but because she chose herself. And Emily? Emily would go on. Maybe she'd fall in love again. Maybe she wouldn't. That wasn't the point anymore. The point was, she had her story back, and she wasn't giving it away ever again. A story rewritten. The breeze no longer whispered his name. The silence was no longer deafening but calming. Like a familiar song hummed softly to oneself, Emily stood at the edge of the lake, the same lake where she and David once dreamed aloud, painting futures in the clouds. But now, those dreams belonged to someone else, someone she used to be. She no longer grieved them. She honored them for what they taught her, for how they shaped her, but she didn't chase them anymore. Her reflection in the water was clearer these days, steadier. There were still traces of the girl who once believed love could fix anything, but her eyes now held wisdom carved from fire. David was recovering. The surgery had been a success, but life had handed him a different kind of scar, one that couldn't be stitched or healed in a hospital bed. He had looked for Emily afterward, but she didn't answer. Not out of cruelty, not even out of anger, but because she had nothing left to give him, and she'd finally realized she didn't owe him anything. She had already given him everything once: her time, her trust, her heart. She had crossed oceans within herself to understand him, to forgive him, and eventually to let him go. And letting go wasn't weakness. It was her greatest act of strength. Some people asked her why she didn't try again with him. Why, after all the drama, the sacrifice, the pain, didn't she choose love? But it wasn't love anymore. It was memory, and she had learned to live with memory without letting it own her. She traveled, she wrote, she sat in cafes alone and smiled at the sunrise. She made new friends. She laughed, deep, loud belly laughs that came from the center of her being. She even met someone new, not a replacement, not a rescue. Just someone who saw her as she was now, not as who she used to be. Whether that would turn into something lasting, she didn't know. And for the first time, she didn't need to know. She had stopped measuring her worth by someone else's love. She had started measuring it by how true she was to herself. And on nights when the past came knocking, she didn't slam the door shut. She sat with it, listened to it, then quietly asked it to leave. The story between her and David had ended. Not with fireworks, not with rage, but with a quiet decision to move forward. He had his path to walk, and she had hers. In her journal, she once wrote, "Maybe some chapters aren't meant to be closed with a kiss or a confession. Maybe they end with a quiet heart and a steady step toward tomorrow." That was her ending. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just real. She no longer needed someone else's apology to set herself free. She had forgiven, but not forgotten. And that was enough. Because forgiveness wasn't about letting him off the hook. It was about finally letting herself live.